Fallout. Starting in 1997, with origins that date back to 1988, Fallout is a franchise that has persevered for decades and has changed a lot over time. At its core though, Fallout is a role-playing game that takes you to a universe where 50s iconography never went out of style, and where nuclear war ended the world. In almost every title, you are left to define who you are in the new societies of the future, while navigating what's left of the wasteland. This is Fallout, an eerie and sometimes satirical look at the future that might be, and it's been one of my favorite franchises since I was a kid. But in today's video, I wanted to go back and take you on a personal journey to show you where my affinity for the franchise began, and where it went after that.
Stars and Stripes!
Hello and welcome to another carrotscraps video, and by another, I mean the 64th. And that's the maximum number of items that you can stack in Minecraft. I don't know why that's important information, but I thought I would mention it. That's the first thing that comes to mind when I think of the number 64. Oh, I guess there's also Nintendo. That's also another 64 number. I don't know. I call myself a Nintendo fan. Anyway, to get more focused, this is going to be a very personal journey of exploration and discovery for me and the Fallout franchise. I'm going to tell a bunch of stories about Fallout and how each game affected me personally, but plain and simple, my journey with Fallout started with my aunt and uncle. As a kid, my aunt and uncle were two of my favorite people. Both of them were video game enthusiasts and shared a particular love for role-playing games. At the time, they were an example of a great relationship, but also an example that if I ever grew up, I didn't have to stop liking the things that I enjoyed. But when I say they liked role-playing games, I mean they really loved role-playing games. I picked up on this while growing up, but knew it for sure once I inherited their Sega Genesis collection. I didn't even know that they made this many RPGs on the Genesis. It's just all sword and sorcery role-playing games. It's incredible. Anyway, every summer I would visit my aunt and uncle in my mom's home state, and during this time, I would get to hang out with two of my favorite relatives. I'd play with their Lego collection, watch Recess the movie, which I'm not a huge fan of. I love the show, but the movie is not my favorite. And best of all, I would play video games. I had a very confusing relationship with video games as a kid. My parents didn't want me to have an unhealthy relationship with video games. They were comfortable with me having a Game Boy or a Nintendo DS, but they didn't want me having a video game console that connected to the TV. So this resulted on me missing out on a lot of video games when I was a kid. So a lot of games and video game consoles that I should have been nostalgic for when I was younger, like the N64, I just don't have that connection to. On a side note, while this logic was active in my home, one of the first video games I ever played was Wolfenstein 3D, before I was even 5 years old. Which I love the quality control there. We want to protect our kid, but we're comfortable with a very young child playing Wolfenstein. Anyway, my point being, when I was a kid, I played video games, but I also didn't. And because of that, I was always excited to visit various people who I knew had video games at their house. Friends and family in this case. So my aunt and uncle are big role-playing game fans, and they're big video game fans. So when Fallout 3 came out in 2008, they were playing it actively. I remember the first time I saw my aunt playing Fallout 3 on her ancient computer. It's important to note that I was familiar with Oblivion and saw her playing that first, and while that game was definitely interesting to me, there was something particularly interesting about Fallout in comparison. You see, Fallout called back to a very different era of science fiction. Going back to the 50s references from earlier, the game employed a lot of retro-futurism in their design. The game's art style represented a retro-futuristic style instead of a modern futuristic style. Thinking back on it, this might have been one of the details that caught my eye the most. As a kid, I would regularly rent old monster and science fiction films from my local library. I was obsessed with retro science fiction. Of course, at the time, I didn't really understand that it was that old, but it really worked for me for some reason. At the time, Lost in Space and Mystery Science Theater were some of my favorite shows, and I feel like that really represented what I was into. And I was into looking at old robots, which is all you do in Fallout, interestingly. With that in mind, it's not hard for me to imagine why I was more attracted to a game like Fallout when compared to the Elder Scrolls. And eventually, after looking over my aunt's shoulder for a long enough time, she allowed me to play the game. I remember the rush of playing Fallout for the first time, specifically because I genuinely felt like I could do anything. Literally anything. That's what it felt like. The reason was, up until that point, I had played linear games mostly, so the idea that I could walk in any direction and start my own adventure was huge to me. I think a lot of people my age had this experience with Ocarina of Time, but Fallout 3 was that big aha moment for me. I don't remember the specifics of that first playthrough, but what I do remember is the awe that I felt. Fallout had its hooks in me immediately. I was so thoroughly impressed, and the franchise would not leave my mind from that moment on. But because of the limitations in my household, either because of personal rules that my parents had or because of financial restrictions, I wasn't able to revisit the world of Fallout for a very long time. But rest assured, I would revisit the world of Fallout, excluding the occasional visits to family members' homes. Time passes and I'm suddenly a student in high school. I make a new friend who eventually becomes my best friend, and they introduce me to a world of technology and freedom that I had never known. This friend was big into computers. Building their own computer and messing around with games they downloaded was all they did at this time. And this was really interesting to me because at that point in my life, I hadn't really had much autonomy as a person. At the time, I barely felt like I could buy my own stuff without permission from my parents. And it was in this setting that I was reintroduced to Fallout 3. My friends showed me their computer, and then they showed me how they modded certain video games. And one of the video games that they would mod was Fallout 3. I was so excited to see this game again. I know a lot of high schoolers feel like they're adults already, but for me, I felt very young at this time. I had a lot to learn, and Fallout coming back into my life felt like 1,000 to 1 odds. I was shocked that I found this game again. I don't know why, but that's what it is. Before this moment, I had seen various memes and jokes about Fallout on YouTube, but this was the closest I had been to it since I played at my aunt's house. So I was so excited to see this game again and to finally be able to play it without any boundaries. I hadn't thought of it much prior, but it was exciting to see it again. My friend wanted me to be impressed by the mods that they had installed in the game, but I was more impressed by the game itself. They were on a whole other discovery path than I was at the time. They had already played these games, and now they were excited to take them apart. I was stuck at the part where I just wanted to play it. It didn't need to be anything more than it already was. I just wanted to play Fallout. And in the basement of my friend's apartment, that's what I did for a couple of months in high school. And I say a couple of months because eventually I'd be able to play Fallout in my own home. So eventually, having a friend that was constantly working on upgrading their computer resulted in me getting spare parts. This was really awesome of them to do, and eventually I had enough spare parts to build my own PC. And with the help of my friend, that's exactly what I did. Now, it wasn't a perfect machine, but it could play modern games, and that's all that was important to me. And after finally building the computer together, the first thing I asked to do was play Fallout. And this, in my opinion, is the real first time I actually played Fallout. Not in passing, not briefly, not with somebody else over my shoulder, but a full playthrough of Fallout 3, of any Fallout game. This was just for me, and I wasn't sharing it with anyone else. It's hard to keep describing how impressed I was by this game and by this franchise. I remember the Capital Wasteland so vividly, and again, just this sense of freedom that I didn't feel in my personal life. That was one of the driving forces that continued my fascination with the franchise. The weird green tint to everything in the world, the retrofuturism, and honestly, just getting to play a modern first-person shooter, all of that was so exciting to me. In Wolfenstein 3D, I would scum save constantly, and I remember playing Fallout 3 and being excited that I was able to do that again. Before I was judged by the video game community for participating in that. Before we continue, I wanted to take a quick break so I could talk about the gameplay that you're seeing in this video and what it's like to play Fallout games in the year 2021. Oh my goodness, are you serious? This is incredible. This is incredible in many senses. First of all, it's incredibly sad. So, the Xbox 360 that you're looking at is actually my first Xbox 360. It's also the Xbox 360 that we'll be talking about and hearing stories about in the next part of the video. In that section, I brag about how this Xbox 360 has never red ringed and how it's so faithful, and yet when I went to go record gameplay for this video, it just decided to red ring, as if the universe had interpreted the script that I wrote for this video as some kind of taunt. and some kind of transgression against it. Oh yeah, you think that your 360 that's half broken it can't red ring? Well, you're foolish for thinking that. For those of you who don't have experience with the Xbox 360, a red ring basically indicates some kind of hardware failure. Commonly known as the red ring of death, if you get this little message from your Xbox 360, you essentially won't be using the console anymore. This was kind of notorious throughout the Xbox 360's life cycle because red rings wouldn't happen to consoles that were years and years old. Sometimes it would happen randomly to newer consoles. But any way you slice it, if you own an Xbox 360 and suddenly it turns red like this, it's not a sign of good things. Let's just try turning it on again. Let's do that. Oh, yes. Thank goodness. Funny how that works. Just one red ring and a scary message later, and all I have to do is restart the console. So yeah, this was actually an easier problem to fix than I initially thought, and it's possible that that's because this wasn't actually a traditional red ring. Sure, it was scary that there was one red light, but from what I understand, you need 3 red lights for it to be a real red ring. Either way, it did give me a heart attack, and it also does prove that this console is kind of just scraping along at this point. Regardless of what the error was, it probably shouldn't have happened, right? Even though this 360 red ringed on me this week, it's actually quite faithful. I still stand by that. Literally, the face has been falling off for at least 8 years at this point, and the disk drive is broken, so it will close automatically, but it won't open automatically. So I have to literally use a tiny little screwdriver to open the disk drive. I'm sure somebody's cringing out there watching this. I even marked it years and years ago with Sharpie, so that way I know exactly where to move it. And yet I've been using it without issue for years. So I think I'm willing to look past one red ring for nostalgia's sake. I don't know, for old time's sake. The Xbox is just messing with me, you know, just playing around. But the only reason I was using this 360 in the first place is because it was really difficult for me to play Fallout 3 and New Vegas unless I pulled out an old obsolete console. I own the games on Steam and have played the games on PC fairly recently. But for whatever reason, Fallout 3 and New Vegas can't just run on Steam. You have to install Windows Live Movie Maker Extreme to get it working. And then when I tried playing my version of Fallout 3 on the Xbox One, that wasn't working either because I wasn't connected to the internet, even though I definitely was connected to the internet. So it was actually easier for me to play these old Fallout games on an obsolete console that red ringed 5 minutes before allowing me to play the game. So if anybody at Bethesda is watching, please make these games more accessible. I would love to play Fallout 3 and New Vegas more easily. Two very important things that happened to me once I entered high school that I didn't necessarily do before was making money and loitering at my local mall. And going to school next to a GameStop meant that I was there whenever I could, buying used games at what I thought were extremely discounted prices. I also went to Burger King a lot. That was also very, very freeing for me. No one could tell me how many burgers I could eat. I could just eat as many as I wanted. This is when I bought Fallout New Vegas. For some reason, until then, I hadn't tried... Wait, hold on a second. I don't have a lot of bobby pins left. You know, I'm normally good at this. It's the drift of the 360 controller, I swear. I guess I should be saying no Johns. I feel like I gave Kyle a hard time about this last time. But I swear, it's not like Kyle was making stuff up. I'm 100% serious. This is the controller. Come on. Come on. There we go. All right, nice. This is when I bought Fallout New Vegas. For some reason, until I saw it in a used bin, I hadn't tried playing it. I think it probably has something to do with the fact that I didn't really follow video game news when I was a kid, or the fact that I was absent-minded when I was a kid. This led to me spending absurd amounts of time playing Fallout 3 again, but also Fallout New Vegas on my new Xbox 360. And I hear you wondering already, didn't you say that you weren't allowed to have consoles in your house? Well, this Xbox 360 was purchased from a friend that I went to high school with. It was not in good condition, but somehow it has survived longer than any of the other Xbox 360s that I own. without red ringing. It did survive without red ringing until I started recording this video, but it got better and it recovered, so I guess the streak continues. And $60 for a console, 2 controllers, and about like 15 pretty popular games at the time? I was very, very excited about this. Anyway, the point being, I transitioned from my PC where I felt a little limited for some reason, and I started playing Fallout on the console. And specifically Fallout New Vegas, because that was a brand new experience for me that I hadn't tried yet. The thing I remember most about New Vegas were the death claws. This is the game where they really made an impression on me versus in other games. Avoiding death claws at all cost, and feeling extreme fear whenever I saw one meet my gaze. I know a lot of Fallout fans say that Fallout New Vegas is their favorite game in the series, and I definitely like it a lot. Boone is still potentially my favorite companion in any of the Fallout games, and the orange definitely is easier on the eyes than the green. I also love that there are more opportunities for role-playing options than there are in a lot of the other modern games. But that being said, while I really enjoyed Fallout New Vegas, it doesn't hit the same nostalgia mark that Fallout 3 does. Who knows, maybe I'll do a playthrough of all the games again, and when I replay Fallout New Vegas, I'll reach this epiphany and say it's the best game in the series. But for now, it's the one that I played a lot in high school. And in my opinion, that's a wonderful badge of honor for New Vegas to have. All right, we're talking about Fallout 1 and Fallout 2 next. So I actually don't remember when I first played Fallout 1 and 2 as vividly as I do all these other titles. What I do remember is owning the game for a little while on Steam, and then one day just suddenly thinking to myself, I know these games are different, but I have to play them if I'm a Fallout fan. It was like up until that moment, I hadn't really realized like, oh yeah, there's 2 games before Fallout 3. I should really check those out just to see what I think. This epiphany might have come after playing a lot of Fallout 3, or it could have been shortly before Fallout 4's release. Again, I'm honestly not sure, I just know it happened somewhere in that area. The point is, I dipped my toes into the world of pre-Bethesda Fallout. And honestly, it had difficulty holding my attention. While I did play Fallout 2, most of my attention was focused on Fallout 1997. Fallout 1 is definitely my favorite of the Interplay games. Setting it up wasn't easy though, and the amount of reading was a hindrance because of my learning disability. That being said, while there was a lot working against the game for me, it did manage to hook me. The graphics, the atmosphere, the music. This is the stuff that I loved and still adore about the original Fallout games. It's so weird because during my first playthrough, it was hitting a nostalgia without even being from my past. It all reminds me of games that I used to play on my family PC growing up. I still have trouble sometimes with reading the original Fallout games. Honestly, it's not the amount of reading that's the problem. I actually like games that have heavy text. I have trouble with certain fonts, and while I love the way that Fallout text looks, it can be hard for me to read sometimes. But at this point, all these years later, I probably revisit Fallout 1 more than I revisit Fallout 3 and New Vegas. I like to do little playthroughs and see how quickly I can game over. There's so many ways to die in the original game. But I can't stress enough how much I love the atmosphere and the music of these games. In my eyes, these aspects were perfect in Fallout 1 and 2, and I wish that the Bethesda Fallout games were similar in tone to these. I do love the tongue-in-cheek of the modern Fallout games, but it's unmatched by the grit and the harsh reality of Fallout 1 and 2. And yes, I know that Fallout 2 is a little bit more comedic than Fallout 1, but my point still stands. Fallout 1 and 2 feel like missed for me in a weird way, and I think that's a great thing. Anyway, let's move on and talk about a Fallout game whose release I was extremely excited for. The Fallout 4 E3 presentation was and still might be one of the best presentations ever, in my opinion. I remember patiently dealing with fake reveal after fake reveal, only to finally have a countdown that was legitimate before the event. The night of E3 was crazy to watch. Getting your own Pip-Boy, getting an app to work with the game, baby names for Sean, I mean, Fallout 4! Alright, all jokes aside, at the time, I was incredibly impressed by this presentation. I remember it ending and literally saying out loud that was the best E3 presentation I've ever seen. I wanted to watch it again immediately after. I was so into this presentation that I would just watch it again sometimes. I feel like watching it right now, honestly. Then, the day finally came. Playing Fallout 4 was, you guessed it, a super duper experience for me. Getting a story about a vault that cryogenically froze its population was the kind of B-movie science that I wanted right up front. I loved the addition of camp building, but I was a little confused by the AI, so I didn't really jump into that part of the game as much. That was something I did more in Fallout 76. But most of all, Fallout 4 was the first game where I would start over my character instead of just playing my first character endlessly. I really liked the different factions in the game, and now more than ever, I wanted to see the differences in the story depending on the choices that I made. In previous Fallout games, I was more into paving my own path and making my character unique with the choices that I made. But suddenly, with Fallout 4, I was indecisive with my decisions, and unsure if I should commit to a path, so I decided to just see them all over time. I guess you could say I got more into the meta of the game than the game itself. I wanted to see the way the game worked, and I wanted to see all the different pathways. I feel like returning to how I used to play Fallout games would help me enjoy them more moving forward. It's always fun to start over and see your other options, but maybe commit to one option and enjoy the playthrough first. This was also the Fallout game where I got more into DLC. It was being dropped as I played the game, so I really anticipated and valued each DLC drop more. Overall, Fallout 4 is a big memory for me. I'll always love Fallout 3 for getting me into the franchise and because I played it so much, but Fallout 4 represented something familiar but completely new, and I loved being there on the ground floor for it. Alright, now it's time to talk about the big one. I don't think I'm surprising anyone when I say Fallout 76 has a checkered past publicly. As a live service and always online Fallout game, it was very different from most of the other entries in the series. These differences created a lot of skepticism from fans and video game players before the game launched. And with a turbulent launch, the game has been a punching bag of opinions ever since. But how do I feel about the game? Well, let's start at E3. When Fallout 76 was first announced at E3, I expected the same energy and excitement I got from the Fallout 4 presentation. Sadly, I didn't get to relive that memory. I was definitely disappointed during this E3. I know it's hard to believe now, but I am definitely not a fan of online multiplayer games. I want to be left alone entirely. So I definitely wasn't the market for a live service Fallout game. But like Marvel's Avengers, I decided to give Fallout 76 a try because of the franchise it was associated with instead of the genre it was a part of. And putting aside weird shipping debacles on the day of release, eventually I was really excited to play Fallout 76 on launch day. Lunch day? On launch day. It's lunch day. Want to play Fallout 76? Me and that same best friend who helped me build that computer that I would play Fallout 3 on way back in the day reunited to experience Fallout 76 together. We played for a couple of hours, met some people in game, and explored the world. But while I didn't dislike Fallout 76 at first, it didn't get its hooks in me like every other Fallout game I played previously. All the other Fallout games that I mentioned in this video got their hooks in me in some way. There was some aspect of it that really appealed to me, and Fallout 76 didn't really have that at first. The biggest thing that turned me off on the game was the amount of reused assets in the world. I think my opinion on this has changed over time because the world of Fallout 76 is beautiful and different compared to Fallout 4, but at the time, I felt that they were way too similar visually. And for that reasons, and probably some other reasons, I stopped playing Fallout 76 after the weekend that it dropped. But several months later, I was at my current place of employment at the time, staring into space trying to cope with whatever weird stress I was dealing with, and that's when I had this sudden thought. I'm gonna play Fallout 76 again, and I'm gonna try and like it. Just randomly, that popped into my head. I don't even think I was exposed to Fallout 76 that day or Fallout in general. And sure enough, that night I went home and started playing Fallout 76 again. And after that night, I played 76 every day for the next couple of months. Longer than a couple of months, honestly. I only stopped doing this shortly after Wastelanders was released. I genuinely can't remember what I was going through when I had that thought, the thought that caused me to return to Fallout 76. But I know I was going through something. I know I was extremely stressed and overworked, and I was having difficulty just existing. And when I think about it, I think the reason that Fallout 76 came to mind during that moment was because Fallout and plenty of other media was always there for me during my toughest times. I needed a new way to escape what was going on in my life, and Fallout 76 happened to be around. It distracted me from a world of stress and allowed me to experience a little joy. This is probably a familiar story for you if you're familiar with my channel. I'm a huge Fallout 76 fan now and have played hundreds of hours of the game on multiple consoles. And yes, for all of you wondering, the game does definitely have flaws, but not only do I love the game for personal reasons, but there are plenty of other reasons that I love the game that are divorced from my personal experience. And maybe I'll get into that in a future video, but for now, it was there when I needed it, and that's what's significant about Fallout 76. I needed Fallout 76 at a point in my life when I was struggling. I had a really tough childhood, and it's possible that Fallout appealed to me back then because I was going through tough stuff. Somebody tweeted at me a couple of weeks ago something that has stuck with me. They basically asked, "I'm sorry, but how could a video game change your life?" And along with some other stuff, I told them that media has always been changing my life. I'm so thankful and grateful that I have been able to use these franchises to escape a world that sometimes is cruel and unforgiving. I've played the other Fallout games as well and have varying opinions on them, but none of them made impressions on me like the games I talked about in this video. I wanted to focus on these games because they really bookmark significant moments in my life. Fallout is a franchise that will forever be important to me. The sense of discovery I felt when seeing Fallout 3 for the first time went hand in hand with some of my first independent outings growing up. If I could do whatever I wanted in this video game, maybe that could be the same in real life. Maybe I wasn't confined to the restrictions of my current life. Media means the world to me, and I'm always happy, if a little sad and somber, to look back and see how it shaped who I am today. Anyway, that's gonna do it for this video. Before I go today, I just wanted to give a huge shout out to everybody who's subscribed to my YouTube channel over the past year, or watched any of my Twitch streams, or followed me on Twitch, subscribed to me on Twitch, followed me on Twitter, on Instagram, on all my social media. I just wanted to say I really appreciate everybody who has been with me for the past year. If I uploaded this video on the right day, April 24th marks the 1-year anniversary of my channel, of Carrotscraps. A year ago, I wasn't able to work anymore because of the pandemic, and because of my specific health problems and my immune system, I haven't really been able to return to work ever since. And as soon as that happened, I decided to put as much effort and work into content creation as I possibly could. I've always been a huge fan of YouTube, and I've always wanted to give this a shot, and I thought that this was the best opportunity to make something good out of something that was very stressful for me. I can't believe it's been an entire year since I made that decision. 2020 really messed up my perception of time, as I'm sure it did with a lot of other people. But I've really been giving it my all year, and I just wanted to say thank you so much to anyone who has joined me on this journey, and to anyone who has stuck with me and supported me in any way, even if it's just watching a video or watching a stream that I do. I don't know what the future is going to bring for myself personally, or this channel as a whole. But until further notice, I'm going to still keep working on Carrotscraps, and I'm going to still be making content for as long as I possibly can, even if my personal circumstances begin to change. I have a lot of plans for the future, of course, more Marvel's Avengers content, but also a bunch of other videos that I think are really interesting or weird that you might enjoy. Videos relating to nostalgia, technology, or media, videos relating to other superhero mediums like comics or video games or cartoons. I'm working on a bunch of stuff that really is important to me and fascinating to me that I think you all might enjoy as well. So if you've enjoyed any of my content, please consider staying with the channel, and I've got a lot of creativity left in me. Again, I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who has even watched one of my videos or one of my streams. It means the world to me. But anyway, if for some reason you actually enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and to subscribe to my channel for more. If you want to watch me play video games live, you can check me out on Twitch at twitch.tv/carrotscraps, and all my other social media, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, are at carrotscraps as well. I want to thank you again so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Wow, I can't believe it's been an entire year. Bit of Carrotscraps behind the scenes knowledge. I made the decision to start making content in my shower. I made a vow. I was like, you know what? I may not have a job, but I'm gonna make content. So, thank you, shower promises.